Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at how NRL teams perform in the first half and also the second half. So this is going to help with your first half betting, and also it's really going to help give you some tools to look at and stats to look at in terms of which teams are most likely to make finals, because you're going to see some interesting trends. This section that we're looking at here is straight from the 2025 NRL betting guide. This is a completely free resource I've put together for all of you for the 2025 season. It is about 500 pages, and specifically in this video, we're looking at chapters 26 and 27. You see your first half and second half teams. So this is what we're going to cover more in depth. So I'm really excited to go through this with you and actually break down how these teams have performed. So, firstly, looking at the first halves, the Roosters were the number one first half side. And straight away, looking at this table, you'll notice that three of the top four teams, so your Roosters, Storm, and Panthers, all had plus 130 point differentials in the first half. And each of the three were leading at halftime in more than 60% of their games. So, straight away, this is already telling us, like, first half teams, if you're good in the first half, that sets you up to be winning games. And you will also see here that there were only two teams who didn't have a positive point differential that actually made finals, and those were the Bulldogs and Knights. The Bulldogs -8 and Knights -26. So of the sides who made finals, they were the only two with a negative first half differential, and the Bulldogs and Sharks were the only sides with under a 50% win rate in first halves. But both of those sides were dominant in second halves, which we'll get to shortly. And the Sharks, they only led at halftime in a third of their games. But when we get to it in a second, you'll see how the Sharks were the number one second half side. So straight away, this is telling us you want to be dominant in first half, put yourself in a winning position, and the top sides definitely did that. The Dolphins, they were the only side who had a positive point differential in the first half, who didn't make finals and obviously finished just out of it. They had a -36 differential in second half, which we'll go through in a moment. Also in the first halves, the Roosters and Storm were the two teams who averaged over 15 points a game in their first halves. There are a number of teams all in that 12 to 13 kind of range, which is still very, very good. So pretty much first half sides, to have a positive differential, you're really needing to be looking at averaging at least 12 points. And then from a points conceded perspective, Panthers were number one, only conceding 7.8 points a game in first halves. Once again, the top three sides in the Roosters, Storm, and Panthers led in defensive numbers as well. The other team that was very good defensively in first halves were the Bulldogs and Knights. That's kind of what kept their differential right around even or just below even. As in attack, they are both ranked 12th and 13th. From a totals perspective, because this is really, really important, the Cowboys averaged the most total points. So when you're looking at teams and their scores combined, so say it was the Cowboys versus Roosters, Cowboys led 14 to 12 at halftime. That's a total of 26 points. That's what we're looking at here. So the average total for a Cowboys first half was 26. That was clearly the best. 24.7 was the next best in the Manly Seagulls. So Cowboys clearly the best. So generally they run up the score in the first half due to averaging 13.6 in attack and 12.3 in defense. The team that had the lowest on average first halves were the Bulldogs and Knights. The Bulldogs just slightly lower at 20.3 than Newcastle. That's the combination of poor in attack and strong in defense that gives them those low numbers. Now, looking at the second half metrics, as you can see, the Sharks clearly and by far the number one second half side with a plus 198 point differential. This is the factor that then moved them into the top four, as opposed to just being a, middle of the pack top eight side. As their first halves weren't bad, but they just weren't leading in a lot of them, and there were just a lot of close margins. If you in the betting guide, there is a section. I'll share the screen again one more time to show you guys. There is a section for every single team, which, so we'll look at here. Just quickly go down to the Sharks section. If you scroll right through past all this information, and the sections for the first and second half performances. So right down here. So first halves, you can see here, majority of the time the Sharks were trailing at halftime and you've got the margins there. But then in the second half, you can see how dominant they were in second half. So there are only 4 second halves throughout the season where they lost that second half. Interestingly, 2 of those games, or 3 of them, were against a lowly ranked side in the Tigers, Eels, and the Warriors game late in the season in Sean Johnson's final game. Then the only other one went against Penrith when they were blown out by around 40 points in that matchup. So here's where you can see, like in the guide, how teams did perform and what contributed to those overall numbers. But coming back to the second half metrics, the way the Sharks got to that plus 198 was they averaged the second most points. So they're one of 2 sides, the other being the Roosters, who averaged 15 or more points in second halves. And they were clearly the number 1 defense in second half. They're only conceding 6.8 points per second half. That is even better than Penrith's number in the first half, where they were averaging 7.8 conceded. In the second half, the Bulldogs rose right up to a plus 104 differential, averaging 12 points in attack. That was up from just 10 in the first halves. And then their defense at 7.7 was very, very strong and down from 10.3 in the first half. So second half defensively, they also improved dramatically. In the second half, the only final side that had a win percentage under 50% was the Knights. Every other final side all had second half win percentages. So, not only do you have to be in a winning position at halftime, you still need to make sure you put those games away, which I know kind of seems a little bit obvious, and it's like a bit of like, oh, well, duh, of course. But it's important to note about how they're getting to those outcomes. Is it on the back of really strong attack and average defense? Is it on the back of average attack and really strong defense? Because that's the specific information that then helps you to determine which bets you should put on that game. From an attacking perspective, there are only 2 teams that were averaging less than 10 points. They were the Titans at only 9.5 and the Knights at 9.8. So Newcastle did very, very well to make sure they secured a spot in the top 8, considering they had a negative first half and negative second half differential. So they did well, winning a lot of close games. Then from a defensive perspective, as I said, the Sharks were the number 1, closely followed by the Bulldogs at 7.7, and then the Panthers at 8.7. Those were your top 3. The other sides who conceded less than 10 on average were the Seagulls and Melbourne Storm, both at 9.8. Right down the bottom there, you'll see the Eels and Tigers both conceding over 17 points. It is interesting that there is such a big jump from the Rabbitohs and Dragons then down to the Eels and Tigers at that 17.5. With like super poor second half defense, that made their matches the highest scoring. Eels were number 1 at 29.1 total points on average in the second half. Tigers slightly behind at 27.3. Interesting, the third highest was the Roosters at 25.5, largely due to their attack at 15, but also they were conceding more than 10 in second halves. Lower scoring second halves were the Panthers, who ranked 10th in attack in the second half, so weren't really that strong and kind of set themselves up in winning positions at halftime and then just grinded out the game. So that's definitely something you can keep in mind and look to take advantage of, because they're so strong defensively in both halves, but they take the foot off the gas in second half, which, there's potential like a regression coming from an attacking perspective this season. So looking at their second half totals and potentially backing unders, especially when they're going up against a good second half defensive side, like your Sharks, Bulldogs, Seagulls, Storm, those definitely could provide really good betting opportunities from a second half perspective. So that's what teams look like in the first and second halves. The betting guide has further information. You can really break down these stats even further. I put this together using the Bet Finder software, which is the tool I've used for over a decade to make a full-time income betting on the NRL and other sports. The same principles that I use for the NRL are what I use on your AFL, your NBA, American football, soccer leagues, and then the MLB as well. But I really love looking at these stats because it tells us so much about these team performances, and it gives you that second perspective. You obviously have your first perspective of watching the game, seeing how teams perform, seeing their strengths and weaknesses with your eye on how they play the game. But then the statistics give you that second half. And the reason why NRL was the reason why I started tracking data, tracking statistics way back in the day anyway, because it was one of the first sports I wanted to bet on. And once I had the realization that you need statistics to properly analyze teams, especially if you're not able to fully watch every single game if you're busy and stuff, then without the statistics, you don't really have a clear picture. And the amount, or sorry, I shouldn't say the amount, the limited amount of information that's actually available for the NRL and how, minuscule it actually is in comparison to other sports out there, especially the American sports, makes it so tough for Australian bettors or anyone betting on the NRL. So that's why I started keeping track of these things. And, that's why I feel like it's so important to share this information with you guys so that you can be making really good betting decisions, not just this year, but in following seasons as well. Like the skills that you pick up. And this is why building skills all the time is so, so important, because as you build more and more, then it becomes more of a strength and you get better, and then therefore you profit more every season. Thanks guys for watching. I really appreciate you following along on the channel. I'm super excited for the season ahead. Make sure you grab the betting guide as soon as possible, and then also stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos like this leading up to the season, and then game previews, try-score analysis. All those videos will be being published each week right throughout the season.